Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's joining from across the world. I'm Jagdish Kattu. I'm the founder and CEO for Uptime AI. And today we're going to have a great session about digital strategies for improving reliability and efficiency of equipment and operations. And we have a wonderful guest here with us, Dr. Chester. Hi, Chester. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great, great. I'm really excited to hear what Chet has to say and share his insights based on his experience. Chet really brings in significant experience in the industry. He is our chief subject matter expert at Uptime AI for the past 2 years, and he's helping the AI-based digital solutions learn and solve operational issues like SMEs. Now, his experience, more than 40 years of expertise in troubleshooting and diagnosing operational issues in variety of industries, all the way from oil and gas, utilities, chemicals, and others. So he was principal consultant at KBC Advanced Technologies for 20 years, advised over 100 plus plants across the globe. He was global maintenance head for Shell International for 15 years, and before that, he was with Exxon Mobil. So I'm really excited to hear his insights, and let's get started. What we're going to do today is we have a set of curated, most commonly asked questions, which we're going to go through with Chet and hear his thoughts. At the same time, I encourage everyone to put in your questions, which we're going to pick up at the end of the session. And if time does not permit, then we will reach out and we'll provide those answers either via email or we'll reach out by phone. Okay. So with that, let me start with some context about what is the digital technology landscape today. So today, if you look at from the plant operations, we have the operational technologies more focusing on monitoring, controls, and supervisory. And on the other hand, we have the information technologies, which are more business oriented and oriented towards information storage and access. Now, Chet, I mean, do you see whether the industry is able to leverage all the information between the information technologies and OT to extract the maximum value today?
Well, it varies obviously around the world, depending on the stage of development of the industry in that country. But there is a definite movement from the two worlds being completely separate to merging together so that they become one integral unit.
Exactly.
The past has been that operational technologies has been on its own and information technologies has been there. The only time the two got in contact was when something happened that they had to go into the other's system to find out what really happened, what led up to it. That line is slowly disappearing.
Right, right. And that's exactly what is happening today with Industry 4.0. The convergence of these two to bring in higher efficiency. And that's where, advanced analytics, digital twins, predictive maintenance, AI assistants, all of these are coming in to create that higher efficiency. Now, but why do we need these technologies? Essentially every business is looking for higher operational margins, more profitability, and the digital technologies are kind of driving towards that. Now, many of the lower hanging fruits have already been addressed. Right. For example, if we just take asset monitoring, when was the I mean, in your experience, when was the first time you saw a computer monitoring a signal, and if it crosses a particular threshold, you get an alarm?
Well, that happened in my career then. That happened in the 80s and 90s. Um,
Mm.
when I started out in, I think it was 75, we still drove around with an ice cream truck and a real-time analyzer to take the data of the equipment.
Right,
So
right.
that part has gone from the single point monitoring to having computers monitor both the process and the physical assets.
Right. Right. And I think, that was the evolution, right? We started with single point monitoring to groups of, tags, right? Monitoring individual equipment. And now we're going towards monitoring, larger systems, right? Groups of equipment and multiple, equipment. And so we're moving from asset optimization, asset performance to more at a plant level. And at the same time, alarms. What do you think about the number of alarms in the industry, or alarms or alerts? Either way.
Uh, I don't think anybody will say they have too few alarms. As a matter of fact, there is a huge drive in industry towards alarm management because with the advent of technologies that could measure everything,
Right.
uh, so many signals were coming in and so many alarms were being generated that it became totally unmanageable for the operator.
Exactly. And that's another trend that we're seeing where, move from alarm/alert to an answer focus, right? And that's what we're doing. And that's what we're seeing in the industry. Now, because of these two aspects, right? The focus on, larger scope, the focus on huge amounts of data, and because of the higher amounts of complexity, right? We're actually seeing a huge drive to move from total manual analysis to using computers and big data and analytics, and using digital technologies to bring that higher efficiency. And that's where the digital strategies come into picture. And that's why they are relevant to what we're doing today. Okay. So I hope that provides a bit more context into our conversation. So with that, I'm ready to get into the most commonly asked questions. Chet, are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, so the first question is, our plant is very old and there are limited number of sensors. What kind of digital approach should we take?
Okay. First of all, we must be realistic in our expectations. We're not going to go from a limited amount of sensors to an industry leading sensor technology company overnight.
Yeah.
We must have a clear objective as to what we want to achieve. That is absolutely the first step. Once we
Hmm.
have that objective, we need to uh, determine what information and what data will be required to achieve that objective and the resources required for that.
Right.
Um, we then have to prioritize as to what in that in those objectives we're going to handle first based on a priority. Obviously, on payback is a good driver. That's what drives everything.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then we have to develop a thorough plan for its implementation. Most
Right.
systems fall down, or most plans fall down by, sorry, most projects fall down by not having a good plan. If there's a good plan, there's a good chance of success.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
this is easier said than done, but if you don't have in-house capabilities to properly develop these objectives and a plan, look for a good solution provider, someone
Hmm.
that has experience in this, because based on this is what you're going to be doing is spending and what you're going to be getting your return on.
Exactly, exactly. Now, I mean, in my experience, I've also seen customers where they do the exercise of sensors, or looking at what sensors they have and what sensors they need, completely independent of thinking about, how they're going to utilize that information. What you're saying is, come from, what the outcome and what is the failure modes or what kind of issues you want to identify, and come backwards towards what kind of sensors you need, and
Correct.
then you start working out on how that's going to turn into a return on investment.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
What sensors do you need to get the information that you want to achieve your ultimate objective?
Exactly, exactly. Yep. And I think that's where, having understanding of domain and knowledge of those value modes will help the plant, come up with the right set of sensors.
Yeah. Um, there, the one mistake you do not want to make is to put yourself in a position where you have too many sensors and you get too big a change in the way
Uh-huh.
you're operating without
Hmm.
having proper training and systems behind it to support it.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Now that makes sense. So with that, moving to the next question, um, So this is again a commonly asked question. We use OEM monitoring services for critical equipment. Can we do any better than that?
Well, it's a kind of yes or no. One thing that's yet no is in general, OEMs have the best knowledge base of their equipment.
Right.
So they have large fleets around the world, which they monitor. And I'm talking now about the major OEMs. They have large fleets around the world. A gas turbine manufacturer, for instance, has hundreds of turbines around the world. So they've kind of seen and heard everything that goes on with their equipment. And they
Mm-hmm.
generally have solutions for that.
Right.
So the OEM will always be a good source of information for the maintenance and operation of that piece of equipment. Where the OEM leaves off is at the boundary of his or her equipment. So what happens upstream and what happens downstream is not within the scope of what the OEM is generally monitoring. And the
Mm-hmm.
result is that the OEM will say, well, it's not my machine. It's something you're doing wrong that's causing my machine to go bad. Now the question is, where is that? And that's where we
Right.
get lost when we use an OEM in isolation.
Right.
It's extremely important that we integrate the OEM with our own information, our own data, our own procedures, that it
Mm-hmm.
forms one. The OEM, in that case, is just one cog in the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
He's not the be all to end all,
Yep.
but he contributes to that whole chain from beginning to end. And he
Right.
sits somewhere in there.
Right. Right. In do you see that issues in the plants are today mostly coming from the critical equipment, or do you see that they are coming because of interaction between the critical equipment and something upstream or downstream, or maybe auxiliaries around that critical equipment?
Well, I think in most cases, the critical equipment, the large pieces of equipment from major manufacturers now is very reliable. Uh,
Right.
so, in general, given the theoretical reliability of that equipment,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, as operators and as maintainers, we have a big influence on the reliability of that equipment, not
Mm-hmm.
not only of the physical equipment itself,
Right.
but the upstream and the downstream operations has an influence on it. When we
Yep.
do maintenance on it, even if it's not the big chunk of metal, so to say, from
Uh-huh.
the OEM, but the
Mm-hmm.
ancillaries around it, we can influence the reliability, but if we do not do it correctly. So it's
Right.
important that we have a good maintenance system, a good operational system, and even down to looking at product planning, because product planning in the end puts certain loads and certain constraints on what the operators can do, how that
Right.
affects maintenance
Right.
as well.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Great. I think the answer is to summarize essentially, while OEM monitoring services are great, they know a lot about their own equipment. It's not the end of everything. There is a lot more components and upstream and downstream what's happening around it that also needs to be part of your overall digital strategy to extract maximum value.
Yeah.
So with let me move to the next question then. So the next one is, we're seeing higher emphasis on energy efficiency. Does efficiency improvement require a completely different digital strategy or digital solution?
Well, uh, one of the things with energy efficiency, it's a creeper. It comes on very slowly, and as with so many things, if things change very slowly, we tend not to notice them until they get to where we don't want to be.
Uh-huh.
So,
Uh-huh.
uh, having information that warns us about these creeps is extremely
Mm-hmm.
important.
Right.
It might not always be directly around the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
A problem in a refinery in a desalter finds its way all the way through the plant.
Mm-hmm.
But the plant that's operating the crude unit or the coker doesn't bother with the desalter because that's not my plant. So, um, looking at efficiency, we need to understand A, what is causing the inefficiency, and
Right.
pay very close attention to the precursors to that inefficiency. And that
Right.
is typically making sure we're operating within the design envelope of the plant,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that we have good data on what we're putting through the plant, how
Mm-hmm.
we're operating it, how we're maintaining it, uh, and then look at how each activity or each action can
Mm-hmm.
potentially affect efficiency.
Right. Right. No, that makes sense. So one of the common aspects, like you were saying, we need to track the changes, the minor changes in the factors that are driving this efficiency. And sometimes, we notice that in the digital strategy, it's important to choose the solutions which are able to track those minor changes. Now, is it in your experience, Chat, have you seen solutions which are or digital solutions which are geared more towards reliability, equipment failures, or would you say it's more on the efficiency side?
Well, typically, the industry has most of the major industries have concentrated on reliability as the answer to their problem.
Mm-hmm.
Efficiency only really comes into play when reliability is under control. So
Right, right, right.
um, the 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 change that we need is that we have
Mm-hmm.
systems that can look at a lot of data and not
Mm-hmm.
consume a whole lot of manpower. Because
Mm-hmm.
obviously we can sit down, if we sit down enough people, everybody can sit in line there, and when they see something changing, pick up their hand. But that's not practical, and that's where an AI system comes in.
Right.
Besides detecting the precursors very early,
Mm-hmm.
AI systems have the ability to also point out other things that we may not have thought of being precursors.
Right.
So we will see on something like a heat map, we'll see
Mm-hmm.
certain events happening that at the first time we see it, we might not think it is there. It is
Right.
anything significant. But
Mm-hmm.
once this pattern starts repeating, the system is
Mm-hmm.
learning that that actually is a precursor because it happened the first time, it happened the second time. Well, it's probably going to happen when that happens the third time as well. And
Mm-hmm.
having early precursors allows us to make changes before the damaging effect, i.e.,
Right.
with efficiency before fouling of an exchanger. And it
Mm-hmm.
allows us usually to make corrections or repairs or change in operating procedures that are more cost effective than waiting until we reach the end where it might be more difficult to correct the inefficiency that arose from operating that way or maintaining it that way.
Right, right. No, I mean, it's very interesting when you mention the precursor, right? Um, is the precursor that you're referring to, is it an efficiency issue which is driving reliability, or you're talking about just a precursor to of something that is causing inefficiency? Do those
Well,
intermingle or?
it can be either physical or operational or
Mhm,
material wise, product wise.
mhm, mhm.
And that's why I say sometimes we don't really make that connection.
Right.
Uh, or
Can
at
you give
least
an example?
um, let's say you get a different type of crude
Hmm.
and the composition is obviously different. And
Right.
to the maintainer, I haven't come across too many maintainers that pay attention to what crude they're running that day.
Hmm.
So the maintainer is always going to see the failure in the same way.
Hmm.
He doesn't go far beyond the equipment that he's maintaining.
Right.
The operator on the front end might know, okay, we're running a different crude and we have to reset it in these different ways. But
Hmm.
downstream, where the product split,
Hmm.
uh, that will operate on the same basis as they were before. Now,
Right.
provided everything is right, there's no
Hmm.
problem. But if
Hmm.
one of those streams is off because of a change in crude,
Hmm.
um, the chances of uh, seeing that as a precursor to a failure might
Hmm.
be pretty small. Obviously,
Right.
the longer the operator is there, the more likely the operator is to detect it because he'll remember it happened a few times. The
Hmm.
problem is,
Hmm.
if it doesn't happen very often, what is our retention in terms of a problem? We get other problems and we forget what the first ones were. Uh,
Right. Right.
a classic case was a case with one of the clients I assisted, that a procedure was instituted about 8 years prior to the incident happening.
Mm-hmm.
It went from a temporary procedure because it was the coldest day. It was a record cold day. So they wrote a
Mm-hmm.
special procedure to start the plant up.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got the plant started. But then after that, every time there was a cold day, they always used that procedure. Then after
Mm-hmm.
that, they used that procedure every time they started the plant up. And after that, one day it was kind of hot and they used that procedure and it ended up causing an incident.
Wow.
So things change over time if they're not recorded and clearly retrievable as to why certain actions are taken.
Makes sense.
So the having a solution that captures all of this
Right.
and warns, is able to warn us of deviations is extremely important and extremely helpful.
Makes sense. Great. So let me move to the next question then. So we see the drop in KPIs, and I think KPIs and dashboards are a common way for a lot of industry operators to monitor the plant operations. But this question is talking about they see the drop in KPIs, but they don't actually see why or where the problem is, right? So how do we address this?
Um, well, obviously, KPIs are the key, i.e., that's the top of the pyramid. But underlying those KPIs are several performance indicators, and that can be quite a widespread. And out of those performance indicators, we come up with what we call a KPI because that is the significant final number.
Mm-hmm.
Dashboard shows that significant final number, but it's difficult to find what is actually happening with all the performance indicators that make up that KPI.
Exactly.
So having a system behind that KPI that says, okay, these are the changes that are taking place, without having to go down every KPI to find out why it is changing, makes that a lot more transparent because it's directly from saying, okay, we have reached a point that is not acceptable, or we're getting close to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in a good digital system, that information is readily available somewhere because it will have sifted out all the things that didn't change and show
Right.
you the things that did change.
Right.
And that is a very powerful tool in that we can react very quickly. We don't need to sit with 10 guys in a room for 2 weeks to try to figure out why this KPI is going wrong.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, so in a way, I think what you're suggesting is that while KPIs are consolidated, which is easy to see, but the system should have underlying infrastructure to be able to measure what is changing and then consolidate that into KPI. Just having the KPI by itself is only going to tell you that there's a problem, but there's no way you can figure out what the problem is with
Yeah.
with just the KPIs. Is that fair
And
to say?
as the KPI, yes, correct. And as the KPI is moving, an
Mm-hmm.
intelligent system can start telling you why it's moving before
Exactly.
it gets to before the manager says, I want this fixed now. Um, the system will have presented the information to the operators or whoever needs that information to
Mm-hmm.
actually be able to act on it long before the doomsday message comes down from management in the morning meeting.
Right, right, right. No, I think that's absolutely important because one of the most commonly um, uh, requested pain point or suggested pain point from operations is surprises. They don't want to wake up and come to the
Nobody likes surprises.
exactly, exactly. Okay, so moving to the next one, and this is a very interesting one. I mean, you're asking, our senior experts are retiring. Can digital strategy help with this? And you are an industry veteran and a senior expert yourself. When did you actually retire, and did that stop your work in the industry?
um, Actually, I retired twice. The last time was, I think, 2.5 years ago. As a matter of fact, just before you gave me a call from Uptime.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but it's a problem throughout the industry. Everybody is suffering from it. The baby boomers are basically now retiring, either
Hmm.
retiring or passing on to other places. The problem has been that we have become dependent on these experts, these SMEs, and
Mm-hmm.
they have their own little place of honor in a company that, this is the guy to go to. But we haven't been very successful in recording that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the thing is with an SME is you can't sit down an SME and say, okay, write down everything you know. It's not going to happen. People have tried it. I have even been in those groups where I was handed somebody put a keyboard and a screen in front of me and said, write down everything you know. And it doesn't really, it gets some of your knowledge, but it doesn't really pull out the real nuggets.
Right. Right.
I liken it to a bit like a laptop.
Mm-hmm.
A laptop sitting in front of you has a lot of information on it,
Mm-hmm.
but unless you ask the question, it's not going to give you an answer. It's
Right.
not
Right.
just going to go up on the screen and throw out everything exactly what it is you want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be able to pull that information from that subject matter expert. That's a
Right.
practical
Right.
issue. Now, the best way to do that, obviously, is during your normal operations while they're still there.
Mm-hmm.
Just if something happens and they have to answer a question, at that time, it's a good time for them to put down what they did and how they did it.
Now, are there digital strategies or solutions that you think can actually do that? I mean, can capture that and can kind of help grow that over time?
Well, that's an important point. It's not just solely the issue of capturing it; it's an issue of making that information useful.
Right.
So just capturing and store it on the, so to say, storing it on the laptop is not going to improve anything. What you need
Right.
is a system that has a certain degree of intelligence that can look at all these different pieces of knowledge, pull that
Mm-hmm.
together, and come up
Mm-hmm.
with a coherent list of possible solutions.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
Once you have something like that, then
Mm-hmm.
the system can also use the input from those that come after the SME. Because as
Exactly.
somebody works on it or the SME has retired and somebody pulls up that information, they will be
Right.
able to add to that information. Because
Makes sense.
we have to keep in mind industry and technology is changing. So what is knowledge today becomes old knowledge tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
one thing I think we overlook is that we're talking about the seniors.
Mm-hmm.
In many circles, they're referred to as the Greys. As the Greys leave, those who are working with the Greys now are going to be Greys pretty soon.
Right.
So
Right.
we need to make sure that whatever system we have captures
Mm-hmm.
their knowledge as well. This is
Exactly.
intellectual capital of your company
Right.
that you do not want to lose.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a further risk in today's job market that the scarcity of subject matter experts because of retirement is leading to pirating.
Might make sense. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have to be very careful that someone doesn't walk out the door and we haven't listened to him yet. So
Yeah.
whatever system it is has to be a live system, not just an archival system. It has to
Right.
be a live system that's able
Yeah.
to capture that.
And I think we are actually seeing such kind of systems in other industries. I mean, there are AI-based assistants for writing. There are AI-based assistants for customer service representatives. And I think a virtual assistant type of solution, which can, to your point, bring in problem solving and learning, right, and growing, I think is essentially going to be very important to address this problem. Now, unfortunately, we're out of time right now, so we won't be able to take in questions, other questions. But let me just try to summarize. I think we've had a great conversation and great insights from Chet. So I just want to make sure that we quickly summarize the topics we talked about. So the first one was about limited number of sensors, and what Chet has suggested is don't start understand what your objectives are, know what are the type of issues that you want to solve, and work with a solution provider who understands the failure modes and who understands how what are the symptoms for those, and come backwards to identify what are the sensors that you need, and prioritize those to be more capital friendly, right? Investment friendly. The other question was about OEM monitoring and whether we need anything more than OEM monitoring, and the answer was about OEM monitoring is definitely good for the specific equipment, but that's just one part in the bigger picture where we need to bring in and to look at the overall plant and systems as a whole, look at upstream and downstream as well. Then we talked about efficiency, how to improve energy efficiency per se in these green and more focus on sustainability and decarbonization. And as Chet mentioned, I mean, the important part is to make sure that we're able to have a digital approach where you can actually identify the smaller changes that are driving the efficiency. The last two questions were about understanding what is driving behind the KPI changes. And that's where Chet also mentioned it's important to not just consolidate the KPIs, but also understand, what are the drivers behind those and look at solutions that can give you that insight. And finally, about senior experts, which is important to find out that look for systems which can capture the information and also, grow or being able to continuously improve themselves, right? And I think these are great insights that hopefully can help the audience with their activities at their sites and plants. So with that, we will conclude this session, but we will go through your questions and we will reply back either via LinkedIn or via email. If you have any questions, feel free to reach us at info@uptimeai.com. More than happy to engage and provide more clarifications. Thank you again, everyone. Looking forward to having more interactions in the future. Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.